Good evening, and we're on the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre channel. And tonight I have Dr. Callum Cooper as a guest. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
You're dropping everything.
I know, I just took something off the shelf and a few things fell off with it. I'll deal with that later.
It's not paranormal then?
No, it's just me being heavy-handed.
Right, so
As probably is most of the times with things flying off shelves.
Yeah, and I'm just clumsy, so you put something on the shelf and then it falls off about 5 minutes after you walk by, and it's just normal, isn't it?
Yeah, it just happens. It just happens.
Yeah, that's right. Okay then, so would you like to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, okay. So I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Northampton. My name is Dr. Cal Cooper. I supervise, coordinate the third year module that we have in our psychology curriculum on parapsychology and anomalous experiences. So that's looking at human experiences and abilities that appear to be outside of the realm of current scientific understanding or scientific paradigms. So the way in which we see the world working and what we know, some of these experiences, so people having a telepathic experience, a mind-to-mind interaction, precognition, a vision of the future, or these experiences perhaps with ghosts and things like that. Sometimes when we try and put a conventional explanation to any one experience, there might be some instances where we can't seem to find one, because maybe the experience is delivering additional information that those people shouldn't know about. So it seems some sort of extrasensory means has come in, and we just don't understand the middle ground processes to them. And so that's what parapsychology explores, and also tests the claims sometimes as well, puts it to the test. And that's one of a few things I do. I also lecture on topics such as death, dying, and bereavement, positive psychology, human sexual behavior, and supervise research projects as well, like PhD students and things like that. I think I've got 5 PhD students now, all doing different parapsychology topics. So that's me. That's what I do.
Amazing. Where'd you start on that? You're an author as well, and recently been on Paranormal Captured. So that was interesting. How did you find that?
Yeah, it's different to some shows that I've done before, and often I've been kind of brought on as the voice of reason and skepticism, but healthy skepticism. Unhealthy skepticism would just be downright going in with the intent to completely debunk and no prior knowledge of what it is we're talking about, usually just a general assumption. But I'd done things like ITVs this morning and things like that, trying to be the skeptic side to people that were insistent that something unusual was going on, and there isn't and shouldn't be an explanation for it. It just exists as it is, as an unexplained thing, which I don't understand how that actually occurs. There's no such thing as a permanent paranormal thing. Paranormal is more so a misused word when actually we mean anomaly. You know, we're aware of some things happening, but its processes are yet to be understood. Doesn't mean to say they never will be. Clearly something is going on. And so with Paranormal Captured, I was asked to bring parapsychology into it because I'd not really seen the first series, and I'd not been involved in it at all, not even as an advisor on the outside. And they got a behavioral expert involved, Angela, and then there was an experimental psychologist, as he labeled himself. Forgotten the guy's name, but he wasn't involved in this one. I think basically I was his replacement, because neither psychologist that they had involved had any background in parapsychology, even though the chap that they had some interest in spiritualism and I think early conjurers and fraud and stuff like that. He had written a book on it, but not a person that I was aware of in psychical research or parapsychology. So I think they were a bit wild when I was telling them about the history of different things. Particularly because of COVID, things went a different way, because they were trying to do a Christmas special, and we were going to go down to London and do some filming there. Locations were set up, but because restrictions for COVID changed, things turned into more a winter special than a Christmas one. And a lot of last minute prep work, especially from MJ Addiction. She'd done loads in terms of collating all of these bits of footage that people wanted reviewing in terms of what's going on there, and then getting those 2 bits of footage on ghost hunting put together for the end. So I enjoyed it. I sat in the chair, got filmed for 5.5 hours, going through every bit of footage that they got. So I imagine Angela got the same. and some of the other crew as well. But depending on what they were featuring in, they didn't have to review themselves. But it was good. I think the end product's always frustrating if you've been in it and you actually know about the process and what you're expecting. Because we had the Paracon sort of conference the other day, and we all did a panel on this and talked about it. And we said how frustrating it was because we were filmed for so long. For myself and the other psychologist, the total screen time that we got out of 90 minutes is about 3 to 5 minutes. And, they chop it up and they take out the bit sometimes that they want you to say. So ultimately, the final product is down to the producer and the editor. And it's not necessarily what you said in its entirety or what you think. And things on just generally on programs on the moment when it comes to ghosts and hauntings still aren't giving even the slightest bit of a hint of a real portrayal of how ghost hunting's done. So there's a lot more kind of work to do with all kinds of programs, really. I mean, I'm happy to be involved in them, but I think more leeway and say and people listening to us all a bit more about how this is actually done properly would help, especially in public perception, because I think a lot of people that are interested in ghosts and hauntings only get this understanding of what it's all about, and this is a completely inaccurate portrayal of ghost hunting.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the US shows and everything else, and the show which actually started it, Most Haunted, how that started everything, and then where we are now. But I know MJ.
It started this portrayal. I mean, shows beforehand that really started an interest were things like Arthur C. Clarke's World of the Strange, and also things like Ghost Hunters. Ghost Hunters was early 90s, and they were really good. And all their basis was just purely on filming at the location, so you could see what it was like, interspersed with witness accounts and expert accounts as well, their opinion on things. So it worked really good as a format. It was very simple, but it was very effective.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I like that way, and I like the way that paranormal capture has been done, because it does show evidence. And then, you do discuss it and work out, can you explain this? Is there an anomaly? What is the problem here? Just a quick shout out then. Hello, Keith Brooks, Wendy Lindsay, Michael Craven, Louisa Brown, Jane Rowley, Chris Wilcox, Justin Clifford, Wayne, John Gould, Barry Steer, Sarah Edwards. We've got a few watching. Laurie Schaefer, Laurie's watching. Nigel
Hi, Laurie.
Porter.
Hi, Nigel. Barry. Sarah.
Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, please add them to a chat. Oh, okay. Right, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one. This is from Barry Steer. So basically, he said he's downloaded Deathway apps on his phone. Do you know how to set it up?
What's it meant for? I've never even heard of it.
Sure. Yeah. Basically, I'd look at the notes around it. If it's from something like Google Play, I'm not quite sure what they are. So if I'd just check where you got the app from as to what it does and how it works, really, and just go from there.
If it's got anything to do with ghosts or hauntings and meant to be applied to that, I'd say delete the app and ignore it. Don't use it. Don't. I was asked this the other day. I mean, I got interviewed. My advice as someone in parapsychology and being part of the Society of Psychical Research on its council and stuff like that, and also with the Spontaneous Case Committee and the Ghost Room things, these apps and things like that, the gadgets, they are not helpful. If you want it for a bit of fun and to just run about in the dark and stuff like that and a bit of thrill seeking, absolutely fine. Really enjoy it. If you want to do things like actually self-experience some evidence, you want to write it up, you want to have someone read what you found and challenge it and question it and try and get it out there, something published or even present it like at a conference, something like that, I'd say just use traditional methods. There's a brilliant book that Steve Parsons just brought out, which was the updated guide called Notes for the Investigators of Spontaneous Cases. And very basic steps, even going back to people like Harry Price, the ghost hunter of the 1920s. If you look at his investigation kit, it was so simple. And it worked on the premise of, let's just look at what's there and then work our way out from there in terms of, we'll work our way up to what the experience appeared to be. But going back to the eyewitness statement is so important, especially when they're reporting breezes and things like that. He got things for sealing up gaps in windows and doors. The most important thing being a pencil and a notebook. top piece of equipment. You cannot get a better piece of equipment than a pencil and a notebook. And you got a few other things, just basic cameras and stuff like that. But keep it basic. That all these gadgets and these apps that come out are just meant for money making and to fantasize the whole thing. That has come off the back of a lot of the TV stuff that's out there as well. You don't see it in any of this. It never makes it. This is science here. This is where it ends up. It
Wow.
ends up,
Yeah.
and this advances our knowledge and our understanding of what's going on here regarding life and death, what happens to the mind as we're alive and experiencing this, what is potentially happening to the brain when we die, all these gadgetries and stuff like that. Some EMF stuff's been done, and more so, it's only ever done to look at if there are strange EMF levels due to electrical output in a building, how does that impact someone's perception on the environment? Because it does make you feel a sense of presence, it does make you feel sick, and things like that. And people can associate particular rooms with high outputs of EMF. But again, the shows will portray, oh, there's something over here, I feel something, and they go and wave the gadget over there, or they'll leave it down and ask the spirits to impact on the EMF meter and talk through it as though it's some form of medium. No, this is not how it's done. It's not how it's ever been done. It's come out of TV. And we're trying to make sure this stuff gets quashed and things are done the right way, because it's fun to do it the right way, and more stuff will get done if more people join forces, because most people involved in psychical research and parapsychology do it off their own back in their own time. This isn't a place where you can find a lucrative career. You really can't. You do it out of pure passion. And so the best thing for all of us to do is work together in the same direction.
Yeah, so many of us do want evidence. There are the people who want to go down the fame route. They're still out now, out and about when there's COVID restrictions on. But, some of us are seriously into it. We want to get evidence, but also evidence which is worthwhile, But it is a lot on people's accounts, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To get a photo is like now an impossible. I have a photo. I haven't debunked it yet, but who knows? It's one of those. We'll never really know, will we? Unless there is a valid reason for it. Okay, I've got a question here from Rory. So, what do you think about teams who use a dog in their investigations, as ghost hunters did for a season?
I've seen people do it and stuff. If you wanted to set up a valid experiment with a dog, great. There's a book called the Story of Ruth by Morton Schatzman, who is a psychiatrist. It came out in 1980, and she initially was reporting ghosts about the house, and they referred to her as a possible case of schizophrenia. When she got to the psychiatrist, Morton Schatzman, he said, look, instead of treating you for a case of schizophrenia, based on what you're saying, I'm interested to know more about these alleged ghosts that you're talking about. So he counseled her and made her feel more comfortable with the experience of ghosts that she was having. And after a time, she was able to become more comfortable talking about them and attempt to project them into the counseling setting, into the counseling labs. And at will, she could produce apparitions that some lab assistants say that they could see. But in some of the early sessions, they'd taken a dog into the setting, and the dog was reacting and barking in areas of the room where the apparition was going to appear before anyone saw it. We could talk about all sorts of forms of group suggestion leading to the experience, but that was interesting where they'd taken a dog in, and they've used rattlesnakes and things like that in tests of remote viewing and out-of-body experiences to see if someone is trying to project their mind to a particular site, a particular room. If you've got an animal in there that's considered highly sensitive, does it act unusually when there's allegedly an out-of-body existence within that room? So they've been used, and again, if you're going to set up some sort of good methodology behind how and why you'd use the dog, then go for it.
Yeah, it's great advice. So that notebook and pen. That's
Mm-hmm.
generally what you need, and take it from there. Because all of us, we do get gadgets. I don't know if you intend to, but you just see it on TV and think, yeah, I've got a K2, I've got a K2 behind me, I've got another one behind me with temperature and pressure and things like that. I use, that they're there, they're kind of decorations sometimes, but it's just there, isn't it? You just sometimes if you can't see something, you want some sort of measurement.
But then it's here. It's here. And that sort of stuff isn't measuring anything that we don't already know. I mean, the K2, it's got LEDs, it's not producing an accurate output, it's just the light system. And so it becomes fanciful when people are then talking to it and asking for flashing responses and things like that. That they have been made for this very purpose of to entertain in the ghost hunting world. So, if you draw it back to some of the earlier stuff, it's far better if you do want to actually measure EMF in people's behavior, but some of this stuff was highly sensitive, so it's not the stuff you'd walk around with. You know, and actually get a digital display with some of the. Rarely ever have I used this, or we needed to use it at the university. Steve Parsons and Anne Winsper give a really good explanation. They even did a DVD a long while ago with Richard Felix called "So You Want to Be a Ghost Hunter,"
Right.
which I recommend people check out. But then it transferred into seminars that they were doing. More so, I think Steve and Kieran O'Keefe, where they were doing weekend workshops about it. And now, because Steve has updated the guidebook through the SPR, and when things become better, this will. I think they'll be moving about a bit more with some ghost hunting workshops.
Yeah. I think people would like to sort of know, like, back to the basics where you are writing down and using your mind more. Just, I do like to walk in a room and find out what I do sense, though. Whereas some
Exactly.
just go in, they make a noise and, you know, they start table tipping or whatever. But it's nice to get a feel of a room, isn't it?
There was I mentioned it the other day. There was a great researcher called Dr. Gertrude Schmeidler, and she was based at the University of New York, and she looked at quantifying the ghost hunting experience. So she did a really nice early study on taking the floor plan of an allegedly haunted place upstairs and downstairs and giving it to a group of general participants going in and a group of mediums going in. And one of those mediums as well was Eileen Garrett, who is extremely famous for her alleged abilities and founded the Parapsychology Foundation in 1951. And the idea was that they went around the building with their own floor plan and they marked down while they were in there, just wondering about how do you feel in each room? And where do you believe most activities probably occur based on your feelings and how you think about the place? And people, I think they were told people have seen this particular apparition and it behaves in a particular way. If you were to just guess what it would look like and how it behaves and describe its personality, can you write a few lines about that as well? And so they did find there were some differences between the general members of the public and these people professing sensitivity, claiming to be mediums, in terms of how accurate they were with getting the right rooms, in terms of the rooms that did present phenomena and those that didn't at all, and also the personality characteristics of what people had seen in this apparition as well. So those were quite interesting. Got nothing to
Yeah.
do with nighttime turning off the lights. It was, this place is allegedly haunted. Here's a floor plan. I want you to just go down and make some notes, and we'll compare it to these other people. So
Yeah.
really, really good.
Yeah, I've been on events where, yeah, they are public events, so they are different, where different sort of groups have been in an area. Then at the end of the night, you compare what you get, and with, you know, and you don't discuss it until the end of the night, and you get interesting results that way sometimes as well. I've got a question from Wendy Lindsay. Have you heard of the skull experiment in 1933? Oh,
So
okay.
I certainly
You
have. Here
haven't.
it is. The skull experiment is in here, and it's quite a chunky piece. It's all of that bit there. So the skull experiment was by Monty Keene, Arthur Ellison, and David Fontana, and took place over quite a while actually. And in this particular cellar, these seances would take place, and people had to sit in the dark, and there was a lot of conformity to the conditions that they had to do as they were told by the people that were leading the seance. And quite a few people went to investigate it as well and have their own stories. So like Nick Kyle, who was one of the former presidents of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, he'd been there to experience it. Professor Richard Wiseman had been along as well to check out the place. So yeah, there's a lot of people that are really interested in Skull. It also led to some independent books on it as well, besides this particular report that came out. So yeah, well known. What do you want to know about Skull? I can't say I'm a massive expert on Skull, but I'm certainly aware of it.
Yeah, Wendy was just wondering about it if you'd heard of it. So, what was the basics behind it?
Well, people were reporting all kinds of fantastical phenomena. Like they would see, there's even video footage of it where in the darkness, these balls of light would come out of the darkness, seeing with their own naked eyes.
Yeah,
And you could go like that allegedly and capture the
right.
ball of light, and then it would pass out through their skin. Allegedly, this is from what they're saying.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
some people even reporting that children would suddenly manifest within the seance and suddenly run up and sit on their knee and touch their face, and they were asked to reach out and touch theirs and things like that. For me, I think I would have just been the absolute rebel. You know, don't take any cameras in and stuff like that. You were told I would have done, and I would have crept out my chair. I would have done anything to make sure I wasn't doing as I was told, because I'd ask, why do those conditions need to be set up in the first place? Why would I allow the medium to have control of the setting when then the experimenter has lost any control? There is no control. And that's what gives way to fraud and showmanship and all kinds of conjuring. This is what made early mediumship fascinating, and even stage demonstrations as well. There are many mediums that were known for being tied up and producing phenomena, but they were seen escaping from their bonds. One of them that was very famous for that was Mina Crandon, who was investigated for a long while by the American SPR. And J.B. Ryan, who had been to one of her early seances, he just wasn't impressed. He'd sat next to her and he'd seen a lot of the sneaking going on. There's really interesting ways where you can be like that and be tied up. But it's the way in which you hold yourself in the first place that can make it seem to anyone that says, go on, test that nut. God, that's tight. But it's actually because you've held yourself in a particular way, when you relax, it becomes loose again. And you're able to take your arms out and then slip it back through the knot.
Yeah.
And put your arms in. So things today, like, you know, if you're still doing it, plastic ties and stuff like that, that the police force would use on your arms and legs now to carry you. If you've been arrested, plastic ties are very difficult to escape from. So it's all a bit different than ropes and bonds and stuff like that. So skull, for me, it's never overly interested me because I just think there was so much room for error. And yet I've got a lot of colleagues that were there and were very sort of impressed by what they witnessed. Even though the main particular report is Skull, produced by Fontana and others.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I've got a question from Laurie Schaefer, which is going to ask you anyway. It's actually on my list. It's about your book, Telephone Calls from the Dead.
Okay, so I produced this 10 years ago off the back of research that Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless had done. They produced a book in 1979 called Phone Calls from the Dead. And they'd initially, Raymond Bayless was the pioneer of EVP research. So he spent a lot of time in the 1950s in a soundproof studio with a reel-to-reel recorder in a soundproof cabinet. And he sat there with the medium Attila Vonzele in silence, with Vonzele trying to project his thought onto the tape. And on playback, they'd hear bangs, raps, scrapes, and voices and things like that. So that got reported, and Raymond did more experiments. And when he was mentoring D. Scott Rogo, they got a few people that came forward to them and said, "Oh, I've had an interesting experience with the telephone. Someone, you know, allegedly dead, and blah blah blah." They had a conversation with them, and all other fantastical ones as well, such as saying, "Oh, I called a friend the other day, and we had a chat. And when I spoke to them later about the call, they said they didn't remember it, and in fact, they couldn't have taken that call because they were somewhere else at the time." And it was verified. So when you called them at that time, who did answer the phone with their voice and characteristics and knowledge and personality? So they looked at all of these unusual types of telephone calls, and I wanted to look at it in modern day. So I'd seen the media present an unusual case of someone that had died ringing their family, but it was just the sound of static. And when they called back, there was no answer. This guy had died in a train crash in California, and maybe his phone was thrown and it was just calling the last people in the call register, his wife and kids. But his body was found. They never recovered the phone, but it was the newspapers that said, "Look at this case of a phone call from the dead." So I thought, well, we've got emails now and text messages and baby monitors and smartphones. Are people still reporting this? Even through to the fantastical calls like Rogo and Bayless had, such as half-hour-long conversations with someone verified to be dead. So I updated it, had a look, and just did a new version of it. I'd done some research papers on it and wanted to do a more publicly accessible book. So the ebook of that should be out soon, and later this year there will be a 10th anniversary reprint of it. So it will be back out again. It's very scarce now because all the copies got sold.
I'm not surprised, because when I read your bio before the show, I thought, yeah, I want that copy. You know, it looks really intriguing, and yeah. So,
I've only got mine, and it's covered in pen notes and all sorts.
oh wow! So even now you use it, then you refer
I'm
to
using it just to highlight it. Like there's loads of highlighting in there where I want to just tinker with a few things and stuff like that. It will eventually get a really big update, but as I say, ebook in a few months of the original, so it'll be there forever if people want to download it. And later this year there'll be a limited 10th anniversary edition of the original. But then after that, I want to revise the whole thing and have another look at it all.
Right, I'll certainly keep an eye out on that. I've actually been at Codmer Castle, where we tried a telephone experiment where we left a mobile in a room. Everybody else was downstairs. We did actually get some responses from the other phone, yet nobody was in the air. And we ruled out any additional noise because Codner Castle farmhouse is right in the middle of nowhere. So it is interesting what you can get, and I've seen that firsthand, and yeah, it's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? You don't know why, but yeah. I've got a question here then. So this is from Alan Michael Wellman. What's been the most convincing evidence that goes surreal that you have witnessed yourself?
In all honesty, nothing. I've never experienced a ghost myself or apparition. I wish I had. I certainly know of many interesting accounts within, the history and the literature. Ones where there's remarkable kind of deliverance of information that people shouldn't know about, that then sent people on a paper trail to try and, find out if what the apparition said was true. Finding second wills that were written distributing money and estate to all individuals rather than some. And if it was a setup, it was a really extensive one that would have required a lot of time and investment. So yeah, there's loads of accounts like that. There's a brand new book coming out soon through the Society for Psychical Research called Is There Life After Death? Evidence, Arguments, and something else. And it's all the latest kind of thoughts and research on survival of death. So I have a chapter in there with colleagues on after death communications. So looking at experiences, particularly of the bereaved, but some of the after death communications involve seeing an apparition of someone you don't know as well, but that person is verified to be dead when you follow it up. And then also some initial work that I'm doing right now on interviewing people working in the funeral industry as well. And that's off the back of research that was done in the 1980s. So some of those accounts are really quite remarkable. But no, I've never experienced the ghost, never experienced an apparition. So I suppose the most fantastic evidence that I've experienced is just through reading and listening.
Right. So nothing yourself then, sudden air temperature changes, light anomalies? No?
Well, even stuff like that. Not that I have. I've been in places, even in the same room, where people have reported that. But that's a real far cry from being evidence to me for a ghost. Because when we talk about ghost, I think apparition
Yeah,
and
that's
seeing of
right.
something, and so a sudden temperature change in a building that has central heating and
Well, yeah,
windows
there's
and
that, yeah,
doors, and a group of 30 people crammed into one room at 3 a.m. where the temperature changes because of everyone's body heat.
that's
So much is
right.
going on. So
Yeah.
that for me wouldn't count.
And usually if one person says it, they all say it as well. So
But
you
yeah,
go, "Oh,
absolutely.
I
That
feel
group
better," and then
conformity. Come
everyone
over
jumps
here. Come. The same thing happens. If people are going out and doing these what they believe to be live EVP recordings. I just mentioned how EVP was done with Raymond Bayless. This recording studio, sitting in silence. The recorder was in a soundproof cabinet. You see a lot of depictions of people taking recorders around a building and holding
yeah,
them in their hand and asking questions and blah blah blah. A lot of all kinds of touch that leads to
that's
feedback.
right.
The main thing is when listening back, someone saying that sounded like Jacob. Did anyone else hear Jacob? Ruined. Absolutely ruined.
Yeah, because everyone,
You,
"Oh, yeah, I heard Jacob," yeah.
the fact that you're even carrying anything in the first place and you're saying you're doing experiments gives away that suggestion that something should be recorded, something has got to end up. So then the brain is listening out for something on playback. It wants to find some conformity within the chaos that it's hearing of your hand against it and then the random static in the background. But then the moment you actually give some sort of conformity to that randomness, and actually it sounds like, and therefore I'm saying it, once you've said it, it sounds even more like it. There's
Yeah,
a brilliant demonstration Professor Chris Professor Chris French gives about this, where he plays loads of these kinds of examples, where he says to people, "What does this sound like?" And unless you hear these kinds of things all the time, most of the time the audience doesn't ever get it. And then the moment he says it's this, everybody hears
yeah,
it. It
that's
could
what
be
it's
an
so
audience of
true, isn't
100
it?
people. There was one where he was really shocked because at the time I'd been listening to loads, and he said to the audience, "Does anyone know what this is saying?" And it went. And everyone went, "What on earth is that?" And I said, "It's, can you hear what I'm saying yet?" And he went, "How on earth do you know that?" I said, Unfortunately, I'm listening to some of this, so it sounds like it was one that was made up, where it was genuinely someone saying that and they'd put static over the top. But they'd
Oh,
reduced the
right.
voice so much, so you're really having to, with a refined ear, hear it. It wasn't static in the sense of true randomness of just wandering around a building where you
Yeah.
can't control for someone whispering or someone having a chat with their mate over here and stuff
Oh.
like that.
Yeah, and as soon as you say, "Will you stand still?" you find people rustling with the jackets or fidgeting or something like that, and it's so painful, isn't it? Sometimes I think you kind of want to be in the room on your
Well,
own, but also you want to film it.
tummy starts to rumble.
Oh, yeah, I'm good at that. Yeah, is anyone there? Oh no, here we go again. Fantastic one, that. Okay, we've got a question from Terry Coots. Thanks for watching. Have you ever replicated the Philip experiment? And what did you
No,
get?
no, but it's an easy one to do. I mean, if anyone wanted to do that, and it's a very rare book now, but it doesn't stop you getting it from your library. I think at the very most with libraries, all you got to do is just pay for the postage cost, and it will come in from the British Library for you. So that was an experiment that was initiated by the Toronto Society for Psychical Research and the Owens. And the idea was that the group come up, you create a ghost, you give it a name, and you give it a back history, and you start to all build on this history and get very used to this person and who they are, whoever you want to make up. And then within the seance setting, you start to communicate with this person and see what kind of activity you get. And they got very strong activity out of it. So it was very interesting for them in terms of what they were learning about group conformity and potential psychokinetic ability from that group conformity, and everyone willing to actually play along with this idea. And then also the idea that if you were thinking so strongly about it, was it becoming quite independent of itself, the activity? So very much like a sort of a poltergeist type activity, but through your own self-creation. So never replicated it, but certainly seen people play around with the idea. And I've seen loads of instances of people trying to do seances while on, a public ghost hunt and stuff, where they're switching out the lights and using infrared and stuff like that. And then they pull out the table or some glass moving and stuff like that. And it gets to 3 or 4 a.m. So again, seeing a lot of that group conformity. The same premise happens if you go to that larger extent of working together, coming up with a backstory and writing it up. They're really interesting group experiments if you can keep going with it.
That sounds fantastic. You obviously do think outside the box, like people see what groups do and they in turn they sort of do a similar thing. But yeah, I've got to sort of think more outside the box. You've used the K2, you've used the different gadgets, haven't you? Because that's how you learnt in a way, wasn't it? Most people.
Well, people have taken, as I say, it it depends on where have you learnt it from, because certainly when I got into looking into haunted locations and stuff like that, my first education was reading about Harry Price and the history of him, and then the SPR. So these ideas about K2s and wandering about with an EMF meter,
Yeah.
they're TV creation, and it's not in the training for this stuff. That's the sort of stuff that really, as a psychologist, I do want to be leaving to the physicists and the environmental physicists and people like that. Steve Parsons once, when he was on Most Haunted, he gave this example that few people really weren't really interested in what the scientist was doing. So when he was there and you saw often Kieran or Louis or Steve wandering about in the background doing this, one time Steve changed it for a block of cheddar cheese. No one noticed because no one cared. But no one does that anyway. I mean, when we're doing that, that's not the kind of depiction that we're after anyway. So it just all got a bit fun from that point.
Yeah. That's it. Hi, Amy. We've got Amy from Haunted Antiques watching, Sarah Edwards. Got Damon from Demonologist. Have we got any questions? Damon actually says that he agrees autosuggestion is such a major plague in investigations and in the line of work he does. Stomata plays a massive part in a lot of demonic hauntings. I guess that brings us to demonic then, doesn't it?
Again, just look at the first instance there. Look at the eyewitness reports and also what's going on. How far will suggestion produce these kinds of phenomena? And there's been some people in psychical research that have looked into the. I mean, this turned up recently because I wanted to look at it. This is an old book by a psychical researcher called Hereward Carrington. He did a book called Loaves and Fishes, which was looking at religious miracles. So the whole idea of the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fishes and things like that, is what's going on there? How does that go around feeding the 5,000? And also weeping statues and Marianne apparitions at places like Zeitun in Cairo. What's going on with these religious overplays and overlaps? And very interesting when you do get some religions saying, oh, we're not interested in ghosts and psychics. In fact, we're dead against it. Really? Your Bible's full of it. You
Yeah,
get a lot of depiction of psychical phenomena in religious texts. If you strip away the religious interpretation, you've got some really nice examples of quite clear-cut phenomena that's cross-cultural as well. So it shows that in terms of human experiences, these are very old, very long-lasting. They predate media influence, and they're very natural in terms of being part of the human experience. So when it comes to these ideas about demonology and stuff, which I think can be very crooked and a bit odd in terms of it being a subject, I think there'd be some theologians that might actually believe demonology to be quite a strict area of study. But I more so see it in terms of evil spirits within theological context than these ideas of people going out with black coats and crucifixes and bags full of holy water and what out saying, I'm a demonologist. I think Ed and Lorraine Warren quite often did that.
yeah,
And there's a lot of criticism of their work. But there's a lot to learn from psychology in those instances of people who believe they're possessed and things like that in terms of autosuggestion and many other things. So absolutely, it's really important to keep an eye out for stuff like that, even within the hauntings. Have you heard that voice? Yeah, I hear it too, and so on and so on. It's
yeah,
cold over here. Do you feel it as well? Yeah, I think it's cold as
yeah.
well.
That's annoying as hell, isn't it? Really, everyone's like sheep. You get a group of people, and yeah, I've heard it, or it's cold, or yeah. So
Demonologist has just finished this book. You've just finished Loaves and Fishes. Fantastic if you have. Well done for tracking down a copy of that. I'm just about to get round to it soon.
oh wow, who's that? Oh, brilliant! Haven't got that one yet.
Demonologist Damon.
Oh, fantastic. Just got this one then from Justin. Done a lot of EVPs and didn't hear anything, but it's heard footsteps on there. Always uh, place it down on the ground. I have a holder so we cannot say that's because we're moving it about with the hands. It's always in a position where nobody touches it. So
Mm.
that's the best way, isn't it? Just don't
It's
touch it.
tricky. It's like if you picture World War One and everyone going out over the top towards a flurry of machine guns firing and people screaming, and you're the Kieran sort of described this in a way in terms of being the medic on the battlefield. But if you are that medic on the battlefield and someone says, "Go to that man over there screaming," you know, well, which one? There's so many factors going on when you're live in a location and you've got other people there and there are natural noises and sounds of the building, its own electricity, its own ventilation
Yeah,
system, its own heating system, and it's wood expanding and contracting within the building and things like that, and your own digestive system, your clothes, as you mentioned earlier. So many things could be picked up by recorders because they're so sensitive. It's not how the EVPs were originally recorded. They were not only in a soundproof studio, the recorder then was then placed within a soundproof chamber itself as well. And the idea was to just sit in silence. And they were trying to figure out why in those conditions were things coming back on playback on the reel-to-reel recorder as well. So doing field studies of it, I think, is really difficult unless you're willing to go that extra step and maybe use some of the older equipment, the magnetic tape. It's a new tape every time. You're not recording over the top. It's in a soundproof chamber and things like that. Read the original stuff by Raymond Bayliss and things like that. Even Konstantin Raudiver with his book Breakthrough and things like that. And then there's more modern work as well that came after that. But if you're interested in stuff like that, just get in contact with me through my website. I can give you lists of books that are still regularly available on the progression of these classic researchers and what books they have out there, because they're very good kind of instructions as to how and why they did what they did. The most modern researcher of this and up to date is Anne Winsper. She's now Dr. Anne Winsper. Her whole PhD is on the psychology of electronic voice phenomena. So she really is the go-to person for this.
wow. I need to do some reading. What can I say?
It's all about books. It's all about the books, the knowledge.
Yeah, my eyes have gone now, though. That's the problem. Need better glasses. And this
Tell me what the book
lockdown.
is. I'll read it to you.
No way. I've got a question from Jane. Helen Duncan is such an interesting character. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
It's tricky, really. She was tested in a number of different ways. Helen Duncan had come from a poor area of Scotland, and she became quite notorious for her claims of mediumship and also producing physical phenomena such as ectoplasm, which would come from her mouth. Some interesting eyewitness testimony from some of the sitters that said that they would smell a very strong smell of vomit inside the seance room. And when you look at some of the early photographs, this was Harry Price introducing infrared photography into the seance room to try and understand a bit further about fraud and deception. So some of these alleged spirits that are emanating from Helen Duncan are quite unflattering when they're meant to represent your deceased loved ones, when they've got very exaggerated noses or rosy cheeks and large eyes, and they look very much like rubber mask dolls and things like that, as though something has been snuck into the seance room. But in terms of the cloth that's coming out of her mouth and things like that, it was assumed by some researchers that she was swallowing cheesecloth, and then in went the fingers when she could get them out, and she was regurgitating it, and it was partly luminescent when she was in there. She was subjected to full cavity searches as well, which would be quite degrading and unpleasant. The fact that you've got some sort of research, I mean, psychical research has been all sorts from medical doctors to psychiatrists, psychologists, physicists, philosophers, you name it. So there was people on hand to do examinations. Can't guarantee they were medically trained though back then. And so very unpleasant and degrading for her. At one time, though, they had taken in one of the early X-ray machines you might see in some of the early carry-on films as well, when they're doing a carry-on doctor or something like that. And someone would just stand behind, and it gives you this portrayal of the rib cage and things like that. So that they were doing early X-rays, and they wanted to see before a seance what was inside her body. There was this one particular seance where that happened, and she was refusing the X-ray and ran out of the building and into the street, and the researchers chased after her and brought her back in, and they X-rayed her, and there was nothing inside. So part of their assumption was, following a seance that I believe to be not really as successful as the previous ones, was that she'd gone and got rid of the evidence. She'd ran out and regurgitated and got rid of the cheesecloth before it began. But on the whole, though, a lot of people were genuinely impressed with how the seances went with Helen. She was one of the last people to be tried under the Fraudulent Mediums Act when she went to court. She was arrested while she was living down in Portsmouth at that time. And a load of people testified, and, you know, even some people giving some really good support for her. And there were people in the witness box that only died, in the galleries that were witnessing, that only died last year. So one of the eminent psychologists, psychiatrist Professor Donald West, who'd been a long-time member of the Society for Psychical Research and one of its past presidents. And he found it remarkable. I actually spoke to him about it at one of the SPR conferences gone by. And he said it was so weird. Everyone was so in support of her, and yet they found her guilty. So it was like there was some sort of conspiracy that some people higher up just wanted her off the scene entirely and not doing whatever it was she was doing because they just weren't happy with it. So Helen Duncan's one of those people that remains, a bit of a mystery. There's a lot of people that think, well, it's just the cheesecloth and then nothing else beyond that. But it's interesting that the eyewitness accounts and people that were paying quite handsomely in some instances for her services as a medium to go to their house or somewhere and perform this, they were quite pleased. So I don't think it was necessarily deserving of finding her guilty under the Fraudulent Mediums Act. But there we go. That's a whole story and history in itself. There are loads of books that have come out about her, and there are loads of reports on her as well.
Yeah. She had a message from a sailor whose ship had just sunk. The government kept it secret and arrested her, as they did not know how she knew as well. So, yeah.
There's loads of things like that. Like Eileen Garrett reported on the pilots from the R101 blimp disaster. People like Chris Robinson, who's been studied more recently, even did a few TV shows with Chris French looking at his abilities. He makes the claim that before 9/11, he told Scotland Yard that the towers were going to come down in a particular way. He dreamt it. Jill Dando, who used to do Crime Watch in the UK, he said allegedly 2 weeks before she got shot that she was going to get shot, and he wanted to write a statement to say that she was going to be. And so Scotland Yard said, look, Chris, you know how serious this is if you say someone's going to be shot and then they are shot. And he said, I want to tell you so you're aware. And so some of these things he put on record with his colleagues at Scotland Yard, and on the days these things happened, he was scooped in and taken through the back door. So some interesting characters out there that make these claims.
Yeah, that's it. The Jill Dando was shocking case, wasn't it?
It was tragic.
Yeah, I've seen documentaries on that. Laurie, what do you think of using infrasound to produce visual phenomena? Asking for a friend.
I mean, it requires sophisticated equipment if you're going to do it. You need the computer software for it and the audio equipment and essentially a generator. Infrasound is around us all the time, so there's no turning it off. When you're in any environment, there is some level of infrasound somewhere. But the experiments that have been done that you will also find lots of discussion on in paracoustics and in the paranormal, Steve, from his physics background, and his own research, his PhD research, has discussed a lot about the impact of infrasound and also artificially stimulating it, having infrasound generators. How does this impact on people in certain environments and in allegedly haunted locations? Crank up the infrasound. For some people, it does seem to increase the intensity of the experience in terms of, again, sense of presence, feeling sick and things like that. Maybe even sometimes with what you're seeing, spontaneous smearing of vision, because it's vibrating your body on a very subtle level, and therefore the eyeballs as well. You might see a blurry grey or white haze, you blink again and then it's gone. Very much like Charles Bonnet syndrome, which is a particular eye condition where you get a similar effect. It's not the same though as actually coming face to face with an apparition and having a conversation. So if people are reporting that in a particular environment, we can't really use infrasound as the full extent of the explanation for those experiences. And people have reported things like that on London Underground, and it's a massive infrasound generator hub. But I still don't think it's necessarily the cause or the explanation for all of that kind of phenomena, but essentially a good contributing factor.
Wow, fantastic. So you've spent sort of ages, haven't you, in a building in Nottingham?
Well, we did, yeah, we did a while ago. That was
Yeah,
Clifton Hall,
that's it.
and
Yeah, it's an awesome building.
yeah, that was ages ago as sort of a baby pet project in terms of just learning to live with the place. And some days of, turning up at 10 in the morning, taking your sandwiches, having a walk around and making some notes, and then leaving again at 4 in the afternoon, and then switch with someone else, and going in pairs or whatever, and just learning to live with the place day to day. And that was an on-off thing for 2 years. I wrote a little bit about it in the SPR's magazine in 2008 when I was discussing apparitions and eyewitnesses and how reliable you can make eyewitness accounts depending on what kind of questions you ask of people. And with that, I talked a little bit about Clifton Hall and some of the things that we did there. But yeah, we spent a long time with that, and it was interesting. It's hard to kind of get locations like that, even for a university, to spend that much time with one and essentially make it your own lab. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. I think we'd all like a location which we could return to frequently and sort of just get access and use it really and try and get information from it. Did you find that different people were getting the same sort of experiences?
No, not really. I mean, no one was really reporting anything.
Right.
It was more so the previous eyewitness accounts that were most interesting in terms of, the one for me that was interesting was an apparition of their 4-year-old daughter,
Right.
who is and was still alive. But she'd been seen in different areas of the building on the staircase and from two different angles, when they'd gone looking for her because tea was ready or something like that. And they were seeing the back of the head and the front of the head as she's playing on the stairs, stands up and then disappears. And then people forget how common apparitions of living people are compared to apparitions of known dead people as well. So this was really interesting in terms of a psychical research side of things and our study of apparitions. And that stuff really interested me. But we, in all our time there, we never had anything like that. Probably some motion sensors went off and we could never find anything that had really set them off and things like that on a couple of occasions. For me, a penny got drawn around at one point, but there was no locked off camera filming it, but I was still the last person to leave and always the first one to enter. And this penny, old English penny compared to
Yeah.
anyone, and then a whistle. The penny moved, but the whistle was lighter and it moved a good centimeter outside the circle. So for me, that was interesting. But
Yeah.
again, structural vibrations, it was a false floor. Maybe walking on the floor to get to it had moved it and things like that because it was placed on the floor. None of the other trigger objects that are in more sensible places with cameras on them moved or anything like that. So it was a traditional ghost hunt, very long-winded, very boring. But the end result, an interesting story to say in terms of how long you spent having a go. We just weren't in the fortunate position of being like a family who owned and lived in it day to day,
Yeah.
hour
That's
by
true.
hour, minute by minute, and just got on with the day, living in it. We were there for a particular purpose, and it wasn't to live in it.
Wow. That's an amazing experience though, definitely. Yeah, I would sort of love something like that. I've got a question here from Damon then. Um, do you think environmental factors play a part in the psychology of people's approach to haunted locations, e.g., Pendle Hill?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's even a particular study within, well, there's two really. You could look at environmental psychology, but another one that we'd term is eco-psychology as well, where you're either looking at from environmental, what the local environment is doing to your perception and awareness, and then also how the natural environment, the eco aspect, is playing on it. So that could be rock formations and natural acoustics and how the landscape just naturally looks. There was some interesting eco psychology at our old campus where we had a lecture theatre where everyone always felt sick and uncomfortable and sleepy in this room and they weren't sure why. Well, breaking it down from an environmental psychologist point of view, there was no clock in the room and there were no windows. So there was no awareness of passage of time or what the light conditions were like outside. The desks for all the lecture theatre chairs were all right-handed. So there was this awkwardness to left-handed people that they weren't registering. They were like, what's going on? And it never really clicked with many people that they were just awkward seating. And the walls were painted this very kind of subtle vomit color that I think was
Yeah.
working its way into the unconscious for many people and just making them feel a bit queasy. So there were all these things added together that just made people feel uncomfortable because they weren't in tune with the outside world. They weren't aware of a passage of time. And Pendle Hill, again, creepy background, creepy history, fascinating nonetheless. And usually, I guess, if you're going there, you've got some awareness of that history and the idea about witchcraft and people gathering in these outdoor farmhouses and things like that that are quite dilapidated in the middle of this kind of valley and field. So all of those factors, certainly, especially if anyone's wanting for whatever reason to go there in the middle of the night, that's really going to play on it. Even just walking through a field and the idea of footsteps getting closer to you or darkened figures in the distance you can't quite see. You're putting yourself into a situation where we can't judge depth perception because you can't see that far into the distance. And our brains are hardwired to look out for other human beings for familiarity. So if we start to look into the distance, we'll see head shapes and shoulders and torsos and what looks like a human figure stood there or in a doorway waiting for us or following us. So, all kinds of things will start to play when you put yourself into one of those environments. And you also know of its history as well. There's all these potentials that will play on your expectation and anticipation.
Wow. I know you've been involved in this. It's a question here from Terry Coops about desensitisation floating tanks or the Gainesfield experiment um, to expand your feelings on images and
Mm-hmm.
your mind can come up with. Now, you've actually been in flotation tanks, haven't you?
Yeah, we've got one at the university now, thanks to some recent funding that we got, and we've also got funding on top of that to do these studies for a further 3 years, and we'll be advertising for a PhD student come researcher to assist myself and Dr. Glenn Hitchman and Professor Chris Rowe in what we're doing. So we've already published a pilot study that came out last year in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. And Gansfeld had been done since the 1970s, about 1974. And it is all about trying to focus more on your inner thoughts and trying to get these images to come forward, especially when you know that you're meant to be focusing on some distant target. Someone's looking at a postcard or a video clip or something like that, a friend or relative, and they're in another room in a different lab. And you're trying to see, what images do you come up with when you're staring through these ping pong balls, the eye shields that are over your eyes, and you've got a red light beaming down, you get this pink haze, visions start to come forward, and you've got headphones on that are just playing white noise or pink noise, as we call it, with this reduced hiss. So it's quite pleasant to listen to. You don't really hear it after a minute. It becomes something else, and your brain starts filling in the gap. You might start to hear running water initially, and then it turns into conversations or metallic sounds, someone working on a car engine or a conversation happening, you name it. And you just say anything that's coming to you. But people like John Lilly, who was the pioneer of the flotation tanks, he said to the Parapsychological Association in 1969, why don't you buy some of these tanks and do a sender-receiver setup? Someone sends the information, the other one tries to receive it from the hallucinations they have while floating in the dark in these tanks. So only one pilot study was ever done, a really, really small scale one in 1980. So we wanted to finally, after a lot of laughs and jokes and a lot of TV portrayals that parapsychologists use these, and we don't, we are just about to, We want to see, are they any good? Can we actually work on a good method for collecting data and carrying out a study? And we think we've got it sort of nailed. We just need COVID to go away. We need more vaccinations to happen. We need everyone to be happy and healthy and comfortable to spend time in rooms with other people, and even in an environment like a flotation tank, where they will be sharing filtered water that other people have been in, and an enclosed environment that someone else has been breathing in, all aired and stuff like that and regulated. But it's still now this concept that we've now created because of COVID. How comfortable will people be with this? I mean, we just hope it goes away so people want to do things like flotation tanks again, because it was a luxury before COVID. People will pay about £45 a time to go to a commercial centre and use these things, or go to a spa and sit in a steam room and things like that with other people. No, how comfortable will people be with that now? I hope when we start to get to a level where we're safe, people do feel that that is okay to do again. When we know that the likelihood now of you catching COVID is very, very slim, because otherwise it's taking away these things that are good for you and their luxuries and things like that. And we want to learn more about it. We want to know what happens to your mind and perception when you're in this.
Yeah, this COVID stuff has affected my mind. I was watching a film. I thought, wow, they're standing next door to each other. And then they were sort of digging up a body because they're doing forensics. And they're wearing masks. I thought, oh yeah, they're wearing masks. That's and your head works differently now than it did a year ago because of the scenario we've all been in, isn't it? Laurie wants to see a photo of you in the flotation tank.
And I've got. Let me show you a different one. It's the one that came in the published paper. Hang on.
Make Laurie's night.
There we go, guys. If you're not a member of the Society for Psychical Research, do join. Anyone can join, and now they've got online webinars and all sorts. You get your journal through the post, you get your magazine and stuff like that. This is the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. Been going since the early 1900s, and it's proceedings since 1882. So this is our paper. This is what it was called.
Wow.
So it was reconsidering sensory isolation in flotation tanks as a method of promoting psych-inducive imagery. And so this made the second pilot. And there is a picture. That's what it essentially looks like when you're inside the tank.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I saw that on your website. Yeah. If you go onto your webpage, there is a photo of that, isn't there? Because it's blue. Yeah.
Yes.
I did see that, yeah.
It's beautiful. I mean, when you're in there, it's very calming and relaxing having this blue light. And with the Ganzfeld, you've got the opposite. You've got this red haze. But when they started to develop the Ganzfeld, they tried blue light. But for some people, they found it very cold as a light within that kind of particular environment. But for the tank, it's more what you expect, because you associate water with blue. And so it works. And the water is to body temperature. It doesn't really give this cold feeling or effect. It gives this kind of really magical idea, because you've got this light that's making the water twinkle and be a bit more special. So it's very calming to try and reduce any anxiety when someone goes in.
Sounds interesting, but yeah, I'm a bit dubious about being enclosed in anything. This question from Jane Rowley. What are your thoughts on the experience where people access past lives through hypnosis? Do we have hidden memories of past lives that can be unlocked?
Stuff like that reminds me of some mediums like Eileen Garrett and others that wanted to be tested, because they said, is this, is my spirit guide or all these other bits of information? Is it just coming from my unconscious? Is it, a secondary personality? Am I just kind of presenting this kind of more creative side when I'm in an altered state, and it's not got anything to do with discarnate spirits or anything like that? And I think for the majority of these past life regressions that I've heard about, if it's not someone that's really famous, I'm, I don't know, Grace Darling, and I can picture myself now, I'm going out in this rowing boat and I'm saving all these sailors that have crashed in this ship, and it's terrible, through to I'm John F. Kennedy and I'm driving through a car in Dallas right now. People that we know of and what became of them and their fate and things like that. Sorry, I was just reading that last comment.
No past life regression has been proved to be correct.
What do you mean by that? If you tell me a bit more, then I could probably answer that. With that, if it's something like that, then it's too publicly accessible to then verify that the person has just come up with it. We can't just assume that they don't know a famous person. If they're
Yeah,
that famous, then there's nothing really to verify there. But then the opposite could happen, where they say, "Oh, I'm a farmer in some sort of landscape, and it's a long time ago, and I think my first name's John, and oh, it's sometime in the 1700s." There's nothing to go on, and there's nothing
yeah,
to verify because it's so weak. There's very little to follow up. So if we get something that's middle ground, where they're coming out with a lot of details, first names and surnames, specific dates, where this person lived and what their occupation was, there's something to follow up, which is quite interesting if we know that by this person's day-to-day living and what they would gain access to, why this particular information, of all information, that's really specific. So that would be really interesting. That starts to get as interesting as when you have children that 3, 4 start talking properly for the first time, and they present skills that they've never been taught, like playing a classical, piano, classical music, and they've never been taught the piano. They're speaking another language fluently, which we call xenoglossy, or they're coming out with information of a second mummy and daddy, and mum and dad can't figure out why, and they start explaining this other family and the situation in which they died. And they also have particular birthmarks or skin pigmentation, which they talk about in regards to the manner in which they died, a stab wound, a gunshot to the chest, and things like that. We question, well, have they noticed the mark and they put a story to it, or has the story actually coincided with the mark itself, and they're actually being quite truthful about these memories and explaining the defects on their body. So those are really interesting. They were studied really extensively by a person called Dr. Ian Stevenson, and then many other people since then. There's people like Jim Matlock and Jim Tucker have looked at these things. So past life regression, maybe if you've got this middle ground of that really specific information that can be followed up on. Otherwise, it's either too famous and too obvious, or it's really non-specific and nothing can be done about it. But it's not really something that particularly comes up with parapsychology. That there was certainly really kind of a popular interest in the 80s and 90s. But I don't know of anyone in present day, or certainly in the time that I've been in parapsychology, doing anything looking into these things really. I suppose it starts to venture off into things that were early mesmerism of psychical research through to hypnotism, which we don't really deal with anymore.
right. So that's where Justin was coming from then. He's watched videos and read some books. Interesting, but he doesn't think anyone that has been regressed has evidence to prove a past life.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
one of those, isn't it?
Is it here? Is it here? Actually, what's in the middle? That's possibly the interesting stuff in terms of that rich information. But whoever you're talking about, whoever you believe you were, got no idea who it is. But let's go and figure it out because we've got some
Yeah.
information to do so.
Yeah, I want to try an experiment because I did past life regression. It came out I was from Nottingham. It came out that I was at the castle when it was wooden. The king was there. Which one? Well, oh dear, I forgot. The King John, wasn't it? Well, while Richard was out on the Crusades.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes. 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 Yes.
And I actually got the cat. I actually looked round, and it's a wooden castle. But I knew it was wooden at one stage. I wasn't sure when it changed.
Yeah.
I picked up that it was a peasant as a fruit seller. I don't like touching fruit because it's sticky. I've got a right phobia about that. So who knows? And also another thing what validated it was that I got killed when the soldiers came back to the castle. And then it was after that that it became sort of a better sort of structure than the wooden. So it's interesting about the timelines where I got the information. I got the name of the king, and I actually want to go back to that location with the trance medium to see if we can pick up somebody from around that time, which is quite a freaky experiment. But it's one of those, isn't it?
I just saw as well Justin's comment there on thought the past life regression was to help people in their current lives and things like that. It can be, I suppose, if learning what they believe to be something about their past, especially in this very kind of spiritual sense, this idea of living different lives and things through that, if it can help them see their current life in a different perspective and they want to take that on board, they want to do something with that and makes them feel better. Great, why not? I mean, the same thing happens when we look at clinical parapsychology and how people might seek out a medium to talk about their loss instead of going to a counseling psychologist or a psychotherapist. they don't want to be labelled as going to see someone to help them with their grief, but they'd sooner go to a medium because it's seen in a completely different light than reaching out for help. Whereas the medium might be doing something that's actually quite similar, but it's all about what the person's taking on board afterwards in terms of facilitating this gap of loss, obtaining a continued spiritual bond with the dead, as though something has continued and it's something to latch on to. So again, the past life regression, if there's something there because people are having current day troubles, if you want to latch on to something that's considered this very fantastic information, or fantastical, as I said earlier, so I like that term. Yeah, you know, some people do. But in terms of what evidence we have for this, that'd be the thing that would interest me when it comes to parapsychology. What could we test there that demonstrates that something genuinely anomalous is going on, or is it just people filling in gaps where you don't need to? They're actually, you know, finding links in something that really isn't there.
Yeah.
You could go and if that is the case, well, you know, let's look at the other side of things. They might not be interested in verifying it at all. They just want to feel better for some reason. And if that's the case, then no one really has the right to take it away from them and debunk it, because that they want something to make them feel better in life. They want a positive. And
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
if they're doing it that way, or people do all sorts of things. They meditate, they go for acupuncture, they go on pilgrimages, they go on all sorts of things. They do all kinds of practices, from very well-known religious ones through to spiritual practices. And if that's what they want to do, then fine. You can look at that in terms of clinical parapsychology. But the parapsychologist, if they were solely doing that, they want to test the claim.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. Yeah, we've gone over time. I want to thank you so much.
My
You've been
pleasure.
absolutely awesome. You really have.
And
Um,
I'll say on a final point, because you asked me about books, if anyone wants to know about, well, what actually happens with all this, we've talked a lot about evidence and things like that. And, you know, maybe why don't we hear about this more and stuff like that? The main issue that's now raging at the moment is suppression of a lot of information about scientist biographies, you know, actually reading about some of these past researchers I mentioned, and also the studies and the evidence. It gets suppressed a lot out there. There have been TED Talks on telepathy that have been banned. There was the whole James Randi $1 million prize about, you know, if you're good enough for
yeah, that's
claiming
right.
your psychic abilities, I'll give you $1 million. It wasn't as simple or as clear cut as it's made out to be. And also Wikipedia, massive kind of issues going on there in terms of editorial groups. And I know myself reading it and a lot of colleagues and people in other areas of science, some of these biographies and pages are just cringeworthy for how they've been edited. So I did the foreword for Craig Weiler's book called Psy Wars, TED, Wikipedia, and the Battle for the Internet. So it's a really interesting one. We recommend it a lot to students now. So yeah.
Just want to thank you for your time. Justin Clifford, thanks. Also, Alan is very interested in regression, as I believed it's past memories from an ancestor, etc. But thank you for your time. It's been very interesting.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me and for this fun chat.
And it's been brilliant. Thank you. I hope to meet you again. I did meet you at Newstead Abbey. That's
You did.
questioning you loads.
I love Newstead. It's like a home from home for me. I grew up having picnics there and running about in the grounds all the time. I adore it, and obviously Barry John, he treats
Yeah,
it as a home from home as well. He's forever there.
yeah, that's
Lives
right.
in it.
Want him to book it again, don't we? Well, as soon as this sorts it all
Yeah, when
out,
things get better. When
try
things
and
get
get
better.
down there again. But yeah, it's an amazing place. But thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for sharing. And good night, everyone.
Take care,
Stay
everyone.
safe. Stay safe, everyone.